So in chapter 6 of Song of Solomon, verse 1, we read, "Where has your beloved gone, O fairest, or most beautiful among women? Where has your beloved turned aside, that we may seek him with you?" And so what we saw in chapter 5 is that Solomon, the king, has had a disagreement with his new bride, a woman that is unnamed for us, but is referred to as the Shulamite. And what it seems to have stemmed from is Solomon's desire to have physical relations with his bride. He wanted physical intimacy. And so when you're looking at intimacy in a marriage, and I'm going to develop that with you for just a moment, intimacy, this desire for physical intimacy, well, a mutual understanding of intimacy is one of what we would call one of the critical elements of a marriage. You see, when you look at marriage, there are various essentials, various elements, various things in the marriage that would be looked at as being very important. And when you look at these things, they combine to establish what we would today refer to as a good marriage. For example, if you want to have a good marriage, well, there's a mutual religious faith that you have, a genuine commitment to the Lord. That's your foundation. There's a developing ability to communicate. There's a total commitment to one another and to marriage itself. There's a heart to give without expectation of being repaid. We call it unconditional. There's a mutual and genuine respect of the one that you're married to. There's a complete trust in your spouse, a trust that is so strong it will not be broken, because that enables you to share your deepest and most personal feelings with this person that you love and that you trust. And you do it because you trust them. You do it because this person gives to you a sense of emotional security. But there's also an attraction, both physical and spiritual, that will bind you. Obviously, the spiritual attraction is something that will be your cement forever. The physical attraction is part of that relationship. And in that spiritual and in that physical intimacy, there's a sense that it is growing. It's what we would refer to simply as a growing intimacy. Now, often today, when you speak of intimacy, people will think simply of physical intimacy. But intimacy is better understood as being open and honest with one another. It isn't simply physical, but in fact, it's something that is much deeper. Intimacy is really a trust. It's trust on a deep emotional level that provokes you, that encourages and provokes you to yield yourself to someone completely. It is what makes physical intimacy what it's supposed to be. Now, the Bible says the two shall become one, and that's a reference to the intimacy, spiritually and physically, that a husband and wife are supposed to enjoy together. And that's what makes it very, very deep and very real. Now, at this point, as we're picking up our study in a moment, Solomon approached his wife. And as he had approached his wife for a time with her, if you will, she rejected him. So he walked away. After rejecting him, the bride felt remorse, and she went to the door to let him in. But he'd already gone. He'd left. And he had left behind a token, liquid myrrh, that would remind her of him. And when he did it, it convicted her, and she began searching for him. But she is unable to find him. And she feels terrible. She feels bad about what happened. She wants to let him know. So in chapter 5, verse 8, she had said, "I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, that you tell him, I'm lovesick." So as she's thinking about all the things about him that she loves, she regrets her actions. And considering all that he means to her, she regrets how she reacted to him. She's been convicted. But what's she supposed to do? Well, knowing that she's in the wrong, she needed to reach out and to reconcile. And that's why in verse 1, the daughters of Jerusalem say here in chapter 6, "Where has your beloved gone, O fairest," the word fairest, the most beautiful among women, "where has your beloved turned aside, that we may seek him with you?" That's why they say that. She wants to find him so she can patch up the difference. And that we need to see in terms of reconciliation. That is an act of humility. It's a fruit of being repentant. It's a fruit of a heart that loves. And this change of heart is a result of her considering just how important Solomon is to her. We saw that she has a list of things about him that make him so important to her. He's a good man. He's filled with spiritual passion. He's driven to excellence. He's a leader, a man of distinction. He has courage and dignity. He's highly respected. He's wise. He's handsome. He has the strength of authority. These are all things that Marie says to me. Thank you, sweetheart. Now, this is one, he spoke to her with love. And this is one who treated her with respect and tenderness. And I closed last time we were together by pointing out that above all of these things, she said, he's my friend. So when you add all of these things together, there's no one like him, and he's much too precious to lose. So this is the kind of thinking that will keep you from becoming hardened in your heart. Listen, a bit of advice. Before you give up on your marriage, stop and ask yourself, what is it that you will lose? And when you take the time to count the cost, it might move you to change your mind. Sometimes in relationships, and I'll give you just an example, sometimes infidelity may be a temptation. Maybe somebody on the job or somebody you know in the neighborhood, whatever, can actually be a draw to you. You might have a desire to know them in an improper fashion and all. Solomon knew something of this, and in Proverbs chapter 5, verses 8 through 12, he spoke concerning avoiding sexual unfaithfulness and the penalties. And let me remind you of a few things. In Proverbs 5, verses 8 through 12, he says this concerning an immoral woman, speaking from a man's perspective. He said, remove your way from her and do not go near the door of her house, lest you concede or give your honor, your best years, to others, and your years to the cruel one, lest aliens be filled with your wealth and your labors go to the house of a foreigner, and you mourn at last when your flesh and your body are consumed, and say, how I have hated instruction, my heart despised correction. He says you need to remove yourself completely, not just a short distance, but get away completely. It's like what Paul later in 1 Corinthians 6, verse 18 would say, when he simply said, flee sexual immorality. Well, today people would say, why would I want to do that? What's the big deal? They'll say things like, something on the side isn't that bad. A little pleasure never hurt anyone. That's not a brand new, by the way, that's not a brand new attitude. The Apostle Paul had to write to the Corinthian church to correct them for having that attitude. There was a saying during their day, and you see it in 1 Corinthians 6, verse 13, and the saying was, food for the stomach and the stomach for food. That's how the pagans thought. That's how pagans thought, listen, if you're hungry, you eat. But they would apply that to all drives, and so therefore, if you're hungry, you eat. If you're sexually desiring somebody, then just partake in it. Just go out and do it. That was how pagans think, and Paul spoke of that. He said, food for the stomach, stomach for food. So he's actually saying something they're familiar with, but he goes on and says, but God will do away with both of them. But the body's not for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. And so they would argue and say, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that you were not saved to involve yourself in sexual sin. So Solomon is speaking concerning this attitude, and he gives a warning in Proverbs. Again, he had said, lest you give your honor to others and your years to the cruel one. In other words, you're going to end up spending the prime years of your life working for other people. In the case of a man, you pay lawyer's fees and alimony. You'll pay child support. You divorce. You marry the other woman. You care for her kids, and you lose your own. I had a young pastor many years ago now who gave me a call and said, Pastor, I need to speak to you. Can I have time with you? And so Marie and I went to spend some time with them to have a meeting with him. And as we were meeting and having a conversation, he began to share with me that he was thinking of leaving his wife. This was a guy who was pastoring a church, but he was having a difficult time, hadn't been married that long, and discovered that it can be kind of difficult when you first get married and all. And so we were having a conversation, and as we spoke, I asked him some questions. He had a son, he had a daughter, and all. He had kids, young kids. So I said, let me ask you a question here as we were having our conversation. You want to leave your wife? You want a new relationship or whatever you're thinking of? You just want to get out of marriage? I said, you have kids, right? He goes, yes, of course. I said, listen. I said, one of these days, your son's going to want to learn how to drive. May I ask you who's going to teach him to do that? Who's going to teach him how to treat a lady? And who is going to, on the first time he goes out to a prom, who's going to help him when he's putting on a suit and putting on a tie? Who's going to teach him to do those things? And your girl. Your girl eventually is going to meet a guy, you know that. And when she meets the guy, she's going to be in love with this guy. And then one day she's going to want to marry this guy. I said, I know that I'm speaking years in advance, but I want you to think about this, because if you go the way that you're saying you're going to go, who's going to teach your son to do the things that men should do? And who's going to walk your daughter up the aisle? Who's going to be the one who's there for her, protecting her, giving her advice as a man should a daughter? Who's going to do that? Who's going to be the person who helps? Who's going to be the one that cares for them? Because Solomon said, you mourn at last when your flesh and your body are consumed. Consumed with what? Well, some say it could be a venereal disease. Others would say consumed with regret. Your kids grow up, they get married, but you're not involved with them. You don't really know them. And often, even at the wedding, you're not even wanted. Some other man walks your daughter up the aisle to marry somebody because you couldn't stay in a relationship. You wanted somebody else. And you're not even wanted at the wedding. How are you going to feel? You don't know your kids anymore. You won't know your grandkids. Somebody else is going to replace you. Solomon said that you'll end up saying, how I have hated instruction, and my heart despised reproof. In other words, your life will end with unfulfilled dreams, and you're only going to be left with the I wish I would have, or I wish I wouldn't have. And in the end, if only I would have, will be your final words. How can we have love recaptured? How can we move forward? Well, one of the things that I'd encourage us to is, what is it that first attracted you to them? You see, a love that lasts is built on something much stronger than sexual attraction. A love that lasts is built on things like faith and shared values, a deep friendship. And those are the things that are nurtured. They're the things that are cultivated. They're the things that aren't to be neglected. What is it that first drew you to this person? Now, sometimes it wasn't a good thing. Sometimes what drew you was just a good time. You had drugs and sex and party and things of that nature. But you got saved. And when you got saved, it was your shared faith in Jesus that brought you together and kept you together. So you focus your attention on the things that cause you to love one another, and not nitpicking the things that cause you small problems. You focus your attention on things that cause you to love. Now, in her case, she had decided to seek, to find, and to recover what she had rejected. So where has her beloved gone? Well, verse 2, my beloved has gone to his garden, to the beds of spices, to feed his flock in the gardens, to gather lilies. And she goes on to say, I am my beloved, said, my beloved is mine. He feeds his flock among the lilies. So she's going to seek him out. She knows where he is. She knows exactly where he is. He's not hiding somewhere. He's not pouting because she didn't have time for him. She knew where he'd be. He's cultivating his garden. And that gives us some basic insights. It gives us at least three. One, as the king, he's taking care of his kingdom. He's maintaining it. The pleasant, the refreshing smell of the spices make it a joy for him to be there. And second thing is, like a shepherd, he's taking care of his flock. Feeding his flock in the garden speaks of taking special care of the sheep. And then third, like a servant, he's gathering the fair lilies, which is a picture of just enjoying himself as he enjoys what he's doing. So his masculinity, his stability, his character, and his loving care provoke her to trust him. Now here's a question to ask, and I want to develop this with you. The question is a very simple one. What is a man? We have a Supreme Court justice who can't give us the answer for that. But what is a man? Well, obviously, part of what makes a man is his desire to protect and to provide. As a matter of fact, the scriptures make it very clear. We men have been created for that role, to protect and provide. In the New Testament book of 1 Peter, chapter 3, verse 7, the Apostle Peter's writing to us as husbands, and he says, husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives. Treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. Treat them with respect as the weaker partner and heirs with you. Under general conditions, our wives are physically weaker than us, and we should have a tenderness in the way that we approach them. That's the point he's making. Very simple. Now, obviously, some reject this concept. They say it's just old-fashioned. It's patriarchal. The attempt to eradicate gender lines has blurred what we used to call traditional roles, and some women reject the notion of a man protecting her or providing for her. It's been said, though, and I want to develop this with you for a moment, it's been said that men have an instinct within us. It's called the hero instinct. It's a biological drive. It's something within us that has emotionality attached to it, but it's a drive within us, and we are born with it. We men need to, we need to be needed. We need to be respected. As a man, we live a meaningful life with purpose. That's a man. That's what we desire. We're inclined to solve problems. And we think by helping you ladies to solve problems, we think that we're actually helping you. And this is where some ladies don't understand men at all. They just don't. And you got a problem, lady, and you come up to me to speak to me. We'll say, my wife Marie has a problem. She wants to speak to me about her problem. Say she does. What's my inclination? What is a man's inclination? It isn't to sit there for an hour and a half to hear the problem. It's to find a solution. I don't want to hear this that long. It's not that I don't love you, but please. What do you want me to do? I just want you to listen. I can't. God didn't make me that way. I want to solve it. Marie will call me. She calls me. This is one of her words for me. My helper. What does that mean? It means I just want to help you. I don't want to hear about it. I just want to help you. That's why women have women friends. They can tell the woman, you know what he did? No, you tell me. He said I wasn't pretty in pink. Oh, what a brute. You know, that's women. Men are different. He said I wasn't pretty in pink. Don't wear pink. And a problem. Got another one? You know, men are different. We are. Oh, I know there's a big argument today. I get it. I know there's an argument. Oh, they're the same. They determine what they want to be. Really? Well, under normal conditions, we'll put it like this. Mamas will know this. Daddies would too, I'm sure. Get a group of boys. Put 3 or 4 5-year-old, 6-year-old boys together. Go to a park. And within 15 minutes or so, they're wrestling. They're picking up sticks and hitting each other, knocking people down. That's what boys do. And the mama, stop roughhousing. But you get 6 little girls. And what do under normal conditions? They sit under a tree and talk about other little girls. That's what they do. We're different. Why can't we see that? Why can't we admit that? Men want to solve problems normally. Men are providers. Men are protectors. Men want to be admired. We want to be respected. We can be assertive. We can be driven. Not all men sometimes this may not apply to every man, of course, but we can be assertive and driven to finish a task. We like to fix things that are broken. Again, boys can go out and they'll jump in the dirt and they play in the wrestle and run around. They want to jump off of roofs. That's what they do. We used to do that. We thought we were protecting ourselves by finding some cushions, and we would get a sheet and we would jump off the roof onto these little cushions that were like 4 inches, and we'd land on them and roll, because that's what boys do, right? And my mom would kind of like, what are you guys doing? My mom found my brother and me. This is an old thing. Only the old people will know what I'm going to say right now. We used to have something called incinerators. Anybody know what that is? Okay, see? We used to burn our garbage. You would actually have a concrete thing in the backyard where you would open up and drop your paper garbage in it in California in the 50s. And you would burn it. It was called an incinerator. Every house had them. Every house had them. My brother Frank and I have an ugly brother who's 2 years older than me. My brother Frank and I climbed inside of the incinerator because it looked like a rocket ship. We were on our way to Mars when my mom came with some trash to burn in the incinerator. She opens up the little plate, and there's our 2 little faces looking at her, filled. That's what boys do. We used to mess around like that. That was just what it was to be a boy. And my mom had to adjust to that. And sometimes, and this is the disadvantage of not having a man around to help you with raising a son, is the mamas want to make sure they don't get dirty. I still remember telling Marie when my son David and Joseph, when they were little, my sons, when they were little, and there was water. Let's face it, water and dirt is what? It's a pool. And so they would climb in and splash, and mud would be on them. And Marie's, oh no. And I used to have to tell her, baby, these are boys. Boys do that. That's what boys do. Girls, they could, do other things, and we should encourage that. But boys do these kinds of things. And that has been lost on many people. What we need to do is we need to remember that there's a hero instinct. You can look this up. It's actually called that. My son David, when he was little, maybe 4 years old or so, his auntie bought him a Superman cape. It had a little S on it, and he had a little cape. And we used to call him Super Baby. And he'd run through the house, and he had his adventures, and he saved people. It was a very heroic thing and all. And so that's just part of being a little boy. And there are those who say if you want to raise a man to become a man, you need to allow that one to go into what is called controlled danger. Controlled danger. What does that mean? It means give him an opportunity to climb up something, to jump off something. Make sure you're there to make sure he didn't get hurt, but allow him to think he's doing it all by himself, because it builds within him a confidence to conquer other things. But if you're always pulling him away from them, saying, you can't do that, it's dangerous here, he's not going to have the strength that a man needs to have in the future. You allow him to enter into controlled danger. That's just a fact, and that's what is missing in a lot of people's lives. Why? Because boys are assertive, and there's a drive within, and you'll see this. I'm just developing a point that I'll get to in a moment, but there's a drive to protect. There's a drive to protect the ones we love, and there's a drive within us that God put in us to provide for them. And we want to be our girlfriends and later our wives. We want to be their hero. When a man doesn't do this kind of thing, it reveals that something is wrong or something went wrong. And it's good for a woman to understand this about us as men. Under proper circumstances, it is simply part of our makeup. And Solomon was a man's man. She said it. She said, this is a man who is chief among 10,000. And she loved him. He had strength. He had the strength of faith. He had character. He had tenderness toward her. And because of this, he was priceless. He was a man who gave her security in their relationship. And that's why in verse 3, that's why she can say, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. He feeds his flock among the lilies. I am my beloved's, and my beloved's is mine. I have no doubt about him. Even though we had a conflict, there's one thing I know for sure. He loves me. They have this love that will last, and I am fully confident in this love. He's committed, she's saying, he loves her, and in this she fully trusts. They could have had a disagreement, but it wouldn't end their whole relationship. You know, some avoid conflicts because they think that they're going to lose the person that they care about. So they don't openly ever really disagree because they fear that this person is going to turn away from them. So you try to be everything you think they want you to be, and it just gets old after a while. Always trying to say the right thing, always trying to do the right thing, always trying to look the right way. And eventually it just gets old. And you're not really yourself. You know, some of you had a lot of dating experience and others very little. I had very little dating experience. I didn't go out on a lot of dates and all of that. So the few dates that I actually would have, I was one of those who would want to figure out what she liked, and then I liked it too, whatever it may be. I liked it too. I liked that food. I liked that music. I liked this place. I would always be very agreeable. That's, you know, and I think it's wise to be agreeable, of course. But when I finally met the girl who I married, the one I married, I had made a decision that by that time I said, I'm just going to be me. I'll just be who I am. Because you see, if I'd been playing it like somebody else, well, eventually the real me has to come out. So what I did is I simply said this. I said, I'm just going to be myself. So when I would call Marie, when I would call her up, or actually I never really even called her, when I asked her out, I would say to her, would you like to go here with me? Or would you like to go eat this with me? So what I was doing is I was showing her what I liked and what, you know, in a meal, this is what I eat. You know, I wanted her to know the real me. You know, I wasn't going to agree. I didn't argue. I didn't try and pick fights. But if she liked something I didn't like, I wouldn't pretend that I liked it. I was just real. I just would smile. So whatever. Doesn't matter to me. You like that. I don't like that. And that's the way I was. So she liked the real me. She didn't go for some guy who was just making himself into something else. You need to be who you are. Now, God willing, you're actually growing in your faith and your love for Christ, and you're moving on. You're becoming something that He wants you to be. But that's how it worked with me. When I dated her, I just wanted her to know me. So I'd say, I'm going here. Would you like to go with me? Or I'm going to go out and eat over here. Would you like to go with me? And that's how it worked. And she'd say, yeah, and all of that. And we were able to become the one that we wanted. Well, listen, the Shulamite knew. She knew her husband, and she knew that he would be where he's supposed to be. In today's terms, she didn't check his social media page. She didn't read his emails or go into his messages to figure it out. She desired to make up. And she was going to do it because they belonged together no matter what. So the key to reconciliation is to maintain a desire to be at peace with the other person. And sometimes a compromise, if you will, is needed. Not a spiritual compromise, not a moral compromise. Just sometimes we have to be aware that there are two sides, and therefore we do our best to be able to work together so that we'll both be at peace. And we need to be careful to put our relationship in front of our personal wants and desires. And a long time ago, I made a decision. Marie and I would agree with this. We made a decision together that it's better to be an us than it is to be a me and my rights. It's an us. What makes us what we are? The two became one. What becomes important to her becomes important to me, and vice versa. And so I decided that the small things that don't matter just don't matter. The things that keep us together are the things that we concentrate on. And you have to learn those things, and it takes some time. Because every relationship may start out beautifully, but you're eventually going to find yourself in a little bit of a conflict. You have to ask yourself questions as you're dating. Let me give you a few examples of what I'm trying to say here. What could be a source of a conflict? Well, who's going to lead the home? How are you going to define what leadership is? If you're dating and you're moving towards a relationship, who's really the leader in that relationship? How's that work? And if you get married, where are you going to live? Are you open to move? Who's going to oversee the paying of bills? Can you make and live on a budget? Are both of you planning on working? Will you want to make it on one income? Are you planning on, or would you like to have children if you can? And how many would you like? How involved are your parents going to be in your marriage and with your kids? If both of you are working, who's going to raise the kids if you're not there for them? Who's going to do the domestic chores? Have you divided up chores? And what if one person wants to leave a church you're attending and the other doesn't want to? How are you going to know when the fight is actually over? Are you able to admit that you're wrong? Are you able to ask for forgiveness? These are things that you're going to work out. If you haven't already, you're going to have to learn these things. These are all things that matter. Well, in this particular case, the bride went looking for her husband. Why did she do that? Because she felt that she was in the wrong. What is it that motivated her? She remembered her love for him. She felt bad, and she wanted to reconcile. And that led to them making up. So, let me give you some advice in this to resolve conflicts. Be careful how you go about dealing with the problem. When you argue, be careful not to lash out in anger, trying to hurt the person. In Proverbs 29:20, do you see a man hasty in his words? There's more hope for a fool than for him. Don't pick fights, and especially don't pick a fight in public. It's really uncomfortable when that takes place. Don't confront your spouse in front of the children, because that kind of tension ruins the peace in the home, and it causes the children to have fear when they hear your voices being raised. Before my mom and dad were saved, I was 20 years old when my parents got saved. So before they got saved, on occasion, because my mom was an epileptic, and my mom took various medications for her epilepsy. On occasion, not often, not every day, not even every week, but on occasion, my mom, we'd invite people over to the house in the 50s and all of that. I don't know if it's that way anymore. Probably not, I don't know. But I know that families would, they'd invite family members or friends in the neighborhood, and they'd come over. They'd play music and dance and just have a house party and all. And my mom and dad, my mom was a great dancer. Mom loved to dance. And they'd come over, they'd play music. But if my mom had a drink, if she had two, she got loud. And it wasn't just loud. It was the mean loud. Some of you know what I mean when I say that. It was the mean loud. It was the accusatory loud. It was the angry, profane loud. And Mama could raise her voice. And my brother Frank and I our bedroom was right next to the front room. There was only a small wall separating us from that room. And I can still remember as a little boy on occasion just getting scared because Mama was screaming so loudly, and it scared me. For the longest time, I was uncomfortable around people who raised their voice because Mama did that. And she'd yell at my dad. And my dad was a very patient man. And it just wasn't a good lesson for me to learn as I watched that. And it caused fear. And I knew that they were going to have people over. I knew we were going to have a problem. And we did. And so you don't want to do that. You don't want to raise your voice. You don't want to scare, because the children grow up afraid. I did for a long time. I couldn't be around yelling. I still am very uncomfortable if somebody starts raising the voice. I don't like to be around it at all. Be very careful with that. Don't raise your voice to make your point. You're simply bullying somebody. You're not talking. And don't try to get others to agree with you teaming up against your spouse. Be careful not to demean your spouse privately or in front of other people. And don't blame set, making it seem that they are the ones who have the problem. Learn to listen. And don't make faces at them when they're trying to share their hearts with you. Listen not only with your ears, but listen with your heart. Listen with your mind. Allow them to share what it is that bothers them. Sometimes you might want to interrupt them. I've had enough. I don't want to hear anymore. They're so wrong. But you need to listen. Learn to listen to what they're trying to say. And listen with patience. And listen with humility. And you might find this interesting. Learn to pray as they're speaking when you're disagreed with them. Pray. In Proverbs 17:27, a man of knowledge restrains his words. A man of understanding maintains a calm spirit. So if you're disagreeing and you know it can get you to the point where you're angry, a couple of options. One is say, let's talk a little bit about this later, and pray while you speak. I'm telling you, that's very important to do, because that way you're not going to explode and say something that might be harmful. Be a person who restrains your words. And so she's looking for him, and she finally finds him, verses 4-7. I'll begin reading there. So she finds him, and now he speaks, and he's speaking. Oh, my love, you are as beautiful as Tirzah, lovely as Jerusalem, awesome as an army with banners. Turn your eyes away from me, for they have overcome me. Your hair is like a flock of goats. How romantic is that? Going down from Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of sheep, which have come up from the washing. Everyone bears twins. I mentioned to you, that means you have all your teeth. None is barren among them. Like a piece of pomegranate are your temples. We've already seen this. We saw this earlier. He had already made these statements to her. But let's look at this for a minute. Now, Solomon could have said, it's about time. It's about time that you came crawling back to me. Instead, he comes on all rico suave. He speaks of Tirzah. You're as beautiful as Tirzah, lovely as Jerusalem. Tirzah was the capital city in the northern kingdom. Jerusalem, obviously, being the capital city of Israel. It's been the capital since 1000 BC. And that's where they live. And so he tells her that she's beautiful. He's saying, baby, you're as beautiful as the day we got married. Again, those are the same words he had said when they were first married. And you saw that in chapter 4. He's saying, you are beautiful and you have conquered my heart. He says, lovely as Jerusalem, awesome as an army with banners. You have conquered me. You've conquered my heart. And it goes on to speak in verse 8. There are 60 queens, 80 concubines, virgins without number, my dove. My perfect one is the only one. The only one of her mother, the favorite of the one who bore her. The daughters saw her, called her blessed. The queens and the concubines, they praised her. Who is she who looks forth as the morning, fair as the moon, clear as the sun, awesome as an army with banners? There are beautiful queens, beautiful concubines, but there are none like you. You're pure. You're dear to me, as an only child is to her mama. Everyone sees you as more worthy and beautiful than they themselves, and they praise you. They say it openly in front of any who would hear. So instead of being punitive, Solomon tells her that she's the only one that he really loves. You're unmatched. There's no one like you. You have no equal. I want you to notice something. Here's a principle. Even before she asks for forgiveness, he's telling her all is forgiven. That's really an attitude of the heart. He stood ready to forgive. In his heart, he had already released her. And he acted out of love towards her. He refused, in other words, to hold a grudge. And he resisted growing bitter. And this is the heart of a genuine man in love with his wife. Well, as he's saying that, she responds in verse 11, I went down to the garden of nuts to see the verdure of the valley, to see whether the vine had budded. And the pomegranates had bloomed. Before I was even aware, my soul had made me as the chariots of my noble people. I'll read to in verse 13. Return, return, O Shulamite. Return, return that we may look upon you. And then the Shulamite, what would you see in the Shulamite? As it were, the dance of the two camps. I'm going to develop this with you and close in just a moment here. When she says in verse 11, I went down to the garden of nuts to see the verdure of the valley, I wanted to see if our relationship was still fruitful, and I found that you still love me. So this would be a picture, we don't have to camp out on it, but this is a picture of new buds blossoming after winter. Something new and something alive is blossoming from what seemed to be dead and lifeless. When she says, verse 12, before I was even aware, my soul had made me as the chariots of my noble people. Let me share a couple things with you. Riding in a chariot during that day was an honor that was bestowed on the most trusted and deeply loved people. It was an honor to ride the chariot. So that's what she's speaking about. My soul had made me as the chariots. I've been honored, is what she's saying. This is an open honor. I have been fully reconciled to my husband. Now I want to develop something with you. Remember how she had spoken of herself when she first was being introduced to us in the first chapter. I'm going to read it to you. In the first chapter, she had said in verse 6 of chapter 1, and I want to develop this, she had said, do not look upon me because I'm dark, because the sun has tanned me. My mother's sons were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyard, but my own vineyard I have not kept. I want to develop this because it moves my heart very deeply. I was nothing. I worked in a field. I worked in a vineyard. My brothers made me do that. I revealed my submission to proper authority by working, but by being in that field, working with my hands. My skin became darkened by the sun, which was not an attractive thing at that time. But she had earlier said, I am dark, but I'm lovely. I have an awareness, but I don't have an overconfidence in this. You took me out of a field, and you made me royalty. You made me royalty. One point. A good husband, husbands, a good husband will make a wife blossom into the beauty that she really is. When you really love your wife, she knows it. And she becomes the beauty that God created her to be. You can make your wife beautiful from the inside. That's what happened here. I was taken from a field, but you put me in a chariot. I was nothing, but you made me something. That matters to me. That speaks to my heart, because I give you the second application, and the second application is very personal with me. I get emotional. I'm already emotional. Forgive me. As a younger man, I became acquainted with a play. It's a book, actually. It was called The Man of La Mancha. Many of you have heard it. Some of you perhaps read it in literature class, or maybe you went to a play. If you haven't, it's a very, very touching and very powerful play. It's about a man, we all use the word, well, we don't. We all can be familiar with the guy Don Quixote. It's a word, there's a word in the English language that speaks about someone being a Don Quixote, and it speaks about him being kind of flighty. So I want to develop this with you. It'll take me a moment. But it's a very personal thing to me that I'm sharing with you. When I became acquainted with the story, and I've had the opportunity, my wife and I, to go to Spain, to go to La Mancha. We've been there. And when I was in that area, I got a little, they have a little, I don't know what we refer to them. They're caricatures of the man of La Mancha. And so I have one in my office. He's got the hat. He's got a military kind of equipment. He's wearing a armor and all. Because this guy was known for tilting with windmills. He was somebody who was kind of fantastic in the way he thought. He thought of himself in a certain way. But it was really a perception that he had of himself. But what's interesting is this. There was in the book and in the play, there is a woman, a character, her name is Alonso. That's her name. She works in a bar and she's an immoral woman. That's what she is. But he would call her my lady. My lady. And he gave her a different name. He called her Dulcinea. Dulcinea. It's my sweet one. Candy. Dulcinea. My lady. In the play, there's a scene where she's in a back room being assaulted, harmed physically. And she comes out with her clothes all torn because these men had taken advantage of her. Don Quixote looks at her and says, my lady. She gets mad. Why do you call me that? And she begins to speak of what she is. I was hated by my mother, and I'm nothing, this is her words, I was nothing but a whore. Why do you keep calling me Dulcinea? I'm nothing. And he says to her, you're my lady. You're a crazy man. How can you speak to me in such a way? How can you, don't you see what I, and she argues with him. And he says, no, you're my lady. My mind went to that when I read verse 12. She was by the way, the Shulamite was a pure woman. She was not somebody like the lady that I'm mentioning. But she says again, before I was even aware, my soul had made me as the chariots of my noble people. I was nothing. But you gave me honor. So she's saying that to Solomon. But that's what we, the church, say to our Savior. I was nothing. Nothing. But you made me something. I was nothing. But you made me ride on chariots. You honored me. You changed me. You made me into something. I know what I am. But you made me something better. This young lady, I worked in a field, but you gave me honor. Me? I was a doper. I was an alcoholic. I was angry and hurt and bitter. I didn't know how to love anybody. I didn't love. I only loved myself. And I would use you to get what I wanted. And then God took me out of a field and made me ride on a chariot. He gave me honor. And that's what he does to you. He takes you from where you were, where you can say, I'm dark, don't look upon me. And he can say, no, I can make you into something. That's why when my kids were small, I said, for me, the symbol of my family is the man of La Mancha, Don Quixote. That's why I have that little likeness of him in my office. Because I was nothing. But he made me into something. And he does that with you too. He does that with you too. You were nothing, and now you're something because of Christ. That, when she said that, I have to tell you, my heart went out. I said, I understand something what she's saying. I was in a field, and now I'm on a chariot. I was there, but you've made me. That's why I love you. Because your love for me has made me into something I wouldn't have been without you. And so, in verse 13, I'll close. Return, return, O Shulamite, return, return. You've been fully reconciled. Love is evident. Come home. And as you do, the two camps that were once in discord will once again dance in harmony. And this is the joy-filled dance of reconciliation. What would you see in the Shulamite? As it were, the dance of the two camps. This is the dance of reconciliation.